welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. As we all know, the College Football Playoff Committee released their third set of rankings on Tuesday night, and as always, we're going to break down these rankings and kind of give you our analysis and our take on them, whether we agree or disagree with the committee's decisions. And as you all know, I have a love-hate relationship with the College Football Playoff Committee. I have always had that relationship with them, really since the rankings started coming out in 2014. But this third set of rankings, I have to say, I agree with for the most part. If you take an initial look here, the top four remained unchanged. Further down, though, the top 10 remained unchanged. There were no changes, no moves up or down for any team in the entire top 10. And a lot of people were criticizing the committee for saying that Ohio State maybe should have moved up. They won at Michigan State, the 18th ranked team in the country, by 20 points. But as I mentioned earlier, that game was only 9-6 entering the fourth quarter. So some people thought maybe Ohio State should have jumped West Virginia or Washington State, and I disagree with that. Don't think that should have happened. I think the committee got it right by keeping the top 10 correct. And one talking point that we have to look on, we're just going to jump right on in. No introduction or anything. We're just going to jump on into it. Will the top four change at all? Looking at this, I know you've got Alabama's going to play Georgia in the SEC championship game. I know Michigan still has a game against Ohio State, but there's a very solid chance that the top four you see right now will be the top four that we see when the final rankings come out, and that the playoffs could very well be Alabama versus Michigan and Clemson versus Notre Dame. Maybe the ranks change a little bit, but those top four teams go, because Alabama will not lose the rest of the season, in the regular season at least. They still have a game against Georgia, but if they win that, they're the lock at the number one spot, no doubt. Clemson will not lose the rest of the season. I do not think they will lose in the ACC championship game against more than likely Pittsburgh. Even if it's not Pittsburgh, I don't think they lose that game regardless. So they will finish the season plus their conference championship 13-0. Notre Dame, if they win out, if they finish the year off strong, and they have a tough game against the 12th ranked Syracuse Orange this Saturday, the biggest game of the week by far. But if they win that and a win over USC, they're a lot. Undefeated, no doubt they finish. Maybe they drop to fourth, but I think they should stay at third. And then you've got Michigan, who's got a game against Ohio State to close out the year, so that game's huge by itself. And then they've got to play, if they win that game, play in the Big Ten championship game against a Northwestern squad who they've already beaten once this year. They were down, I think, 17 points in that game, battled all the way back. So it wouldn't be easy, but should get the win there. Wouldn't boost their resume in the slightest, but that win over Ohio State would do the trick. So there's a chance that that top four could stay the exact same. Now, there's also the possibility that Alabama wins, but then Georgia beats them in the SEC championship game. Sparks some controversy there. Michigan loses to Ohio State. And then maybe Clemson gets upset or Notre Dame loses to Syracuse or something like that. Then everything gets thrown into a tailspin. I'm sure one of those things will happen. One of those things will happen, because it always does. It's November, it's towards the end of the year, something crazy is going to happen that's going to send this College Football Playoff Committee into a tailspin, and there's going to be some controversy like we saw last year between Ohio State and Alabama. Something will happen that will make everything chaos. It's going to happen at some point. We just don't know when it's going to be. Will it be this week, or will it be the next week in the final week of the season, or will it be when conference championships roll around? Who knows? But I think the top four is correct. I think Georgia, Oklahoma, LSU, right there, correct. Some people said LSU maybe should have dropped a little bit. Maybe Washington State jumped them because they only won by 7 against Arkansas. My argument to that would be that LSU was up in that game 24-3, I believe it was, before Arkansas scored a couple late touchdowns and tried to make it come back, but really it looked a lot closer than it really was. So LSU, I think, deserves to stay at 7. But really, there's no way in my eyes that LSU can slip into the top four. It's just not feasible in any way, because you still got 2 SEC schools ahead of them. Those 2 SEC schools are going to be playing in the SEC championship game. I just don't see any way LSU can slip in there. But crazier things have happened. My biggest concern, my biggest observation is going to be, obviously, yes, like I mentioned, those scenarios a second ago. We'll dive into those in later weeks when we get closer to time. But could you see a push from West Virginia if they can beat Oklahoma and then win the Big 12? Is there a chance that they could slip in there? Could you see a push from Oklahoma? 6 isn't that far out. If they beat West Virginia, win the Big 12 championship, could they get back to the College Football Playoff? Could you see a push from Washington State, finishing the season 13-1 with a Pac-12 title? The problem is their resume is not great. Now, the good thing for Washington State is that the team we have right next to them here, Washington, is ranked 18th in the country, could very well be 15th by the time they meet in the Apple Cup in the season finale. And if that is the case, that's going to be a huge resume-boosting win for the Cougars if they can get that win. If they can beat Washington and then beat a Utah or an Arizona State or somebody in the Pac-12 championship game, and then maybe a little help ahead of them, is there a chance that Washington State could crack the top 4? There's so many possibilities here, and we'll have a video dedicated to that at one point where we just break down all the scenarios and what could possibly happen. Might even have a live stream for that one. So I always talk about the top 10. That's obviously probably the most important, but I've always said that the committee can't sit there and just get the top 10 right, get the top 4 right, and then say forget about everybody else, let's just throw them in there. The bottom half matters. 11 through 25 matters. And I said if they aren't going to matter, if they aren't going to put the work into that, then we might as well just rank the top 10 with the committee and have the AP poll do the rest. But the top 25 overall looks good. They gave a lot of love to the group of 5 schools. If you look here, 23 through 25, you've got Utah State, Cincinnati, and Boise State. That's kind of important because UCF has a date against Cincinnati, so of course they threw Cincinnati in there. They rightfully so deserve to be. They have been a very dominant football team this season, but of course they throw them in there to have a top 25 matchup there. If the Bearcats were to beat Central Florida, which is where College Game Day is going this week, finally getting a little attention for the Knights. If they were to win that game, though, then you could see a major tailspin and who's going to get that New Year's Six bowl berth from a group of 5 school. Because Cincinnati would rise quite a bit in the rankings. UCF would drop quite a bit in the rankings. You've got Boise State still in the hunt for a Mountain West Championship game, who they might have to face off against Utah State for. So if Cincinnati beats Central Florida, it's up for grabs for who's going to get that New Year's Six bowl game. It's going to be very close and very tightly contested between these 4 group of 5 schools. I'm very excited to see how this turns out, and you've got 2 from the American Athletic and 2 from the Mountain West. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. If Central Florida gets the win over the Bearcats, though, it's theirs to lose. I don't think they lose for the rest of the year. So it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out, how the committee decides to rank those schools, especially if we see some wild controversy, some wild chaos there. It's going to be interesting to see. We had some big jumps for some teams. We saw Penn State jump 6 spots. We saw Texas jump 4 spots. Iowa State jumped 6, but the biggest jump was Washington from 25th to 18th. It was a big jump for the Huskies there. You're jumping all the way up there. Utah cracking the top 25 after a huge win over Oregon, a game where they had to play without their starting quarterback and their starting running back, so certainly worthy of that 19 spot, especially with a 7-3 record. I have no problems with that. Boston College dropped quite a bit after their 20-point loss to Clemson, but that's somewhat respectable with the way Clemson had been playing against some of these opponents, beating them by 50, 60 points. A respectable showing for the Eagles there. Texas and Iowa State have got a showdown this Saturday, so I'm curious to see how this one plays out. This game big for both of these schools because they technically are both still in the hunt for the Big 12 championship game. There's a very solid opportunity that Texas could still slip in there, even with, I think, 2 conference losses. Iowa State only has 2 conference losses. So both of those schools still have an outside chance of getting into the Big 12 championship game. Will it happen? We'll have to wait and find out. But that game's going to be huge, a solid ranked versus ranked matchup there. I will say that I disagree with Penn State jumping 6 spots. Their win over Wisconsin was impressive, but it is Wisconsin, a team that has not been as impressive and looked as good as we expected them to be at the start of the year. But nonetheless, they did jump 6, and I think Penn State will sneak into a New Year's Six bowl game if they win out, which I think they will. But overall, these rankings looking fairly solid. As I said, we have a love-hate relationship with them. Some things I've disagreed on. I'm sure at the end of this week, when the next rankings come out, or especially after rivalry week, I will definitely have a lot to say because I think we will see some major upsets that will really send things into a tailspin. And I'm curious to see how the committee thinks and what their thought process is like when those things happen. So I'm really curious to see how all of that plays out because the top 4 looks solid for now. It might be the top 4 at the end of the year, but my gut's saying that it's not going to be, and some things are majorly going to change. So we're just going to have to wait and find out. That's why college football is so great. That's why the month of November is so great. You never know what's going to happen in the world of college football. But right now, these are your top 25 college football playoff rankings going in to Week 12 of the college football season. So make sure you stay tuned for that. It might not be the most exciting week of games, but it's still college football, and you got to soak it all in because we are running out of time. So as always, please go check us out on Twitter at Gridiron Expert, always here on YouTube as well. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time on the Gridiron Expert.